Kevin Costner Biography, Movies and Facts. Kevin Costner, born January 18, 1955, Lynwood, California, U.S., is an American film actor and director known for his portrayals of rugged individualists with sensitive streaks. He found success in such movies as The Untouchables, 1987, Bull Durham, 1988, Field of Dreams, 1989, and The Bodyguard, 1992, but is perhaps best known for Dances with Wolves, 1990, for which he won Oscars for Best Picture and Director. He had a late career resurgence as the star, 2018 to 23, of the TV series Yellowstone, Bull Durham, and Field of Dreams. After graduating from business school at California State University, Fullerton, B.A., 1978, Costner began taking acting lessons following an encouraging encounter aboard an airplane with actor Richard Burton. Costner's scenes were famously cut from The Big Chill, 1983, the motion picture that provided the breakthrough for several other young actors, but its director, Lawrence Kasdan, later cast Costner in the Western Silverado, 1985. Costner's first starring roles came in 1987. That year he appeared as Elliot Ness in The Untouchables, and he then portrayed a naval officer who becomes a murder suspect in the political thriller No Way Out. His further success in the baseball movies Bull Durham, 1988, and Field of Dreams, 1989, made him a popular leading man, and he formed his own production company in 1989, Dances with Wolves and The Bodyguard. In 1990, Costner produced, directed, and acted in another hit, Dances with Wolves, about an American Civil War soldier who assimilates into a Sioux community. The film won the Academy Award for Best Picture, and Costner also won an Oscar and Golden Globe Award for Best Director. After taking on the title role in Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, 1991, Costner portrayed the tenacious district attorney Jim Garrison in Oliver Stone's JFK, 1991, and starred opposite Whitney Houston in the romance The Bodyguard, 1992. Subsequent acting credits in the 1990s include Clint Eastwood's drama A Perfect World, 1993, The Post-Apocalyptic Waterworld, 1995, and The Postman, 1997, the latter of which he also directed, and the sports-themed Tin Cup, 1996, and For Love of the Game, 1999. Open Range, Hidden Figures, and Molly's Game. In the early 21st century, Costner directed his third film, the Western Open Range, 2003, in which he also starred. He continued to act in such movies as 13 Days, 2000, a dramatization of the Cuban Missile Crisis, the comic dramas The Upside of Anger, 2005, and Swing Vote, 2008, and the action movie The Guardian, 2006. Costner then was cast as the head of the Hatfield family in the television miniseries Hatfields and McCoys, 2012, for which he won an Emmy Award and a Golden Globe. He returned to movies in 2013 with the Superman film Man of Steel, playing Clark Kent's adoptive father. In 2014, Costner portrayed a veteran CIA agent in the thriller Jack Ryan, Shadow Recruit, a spy trying to manage his family life in 3 Days to Kill, the general manager of an NFL team in Draft Day, and a single man trying to raise his biracial granddaughter in Black or White. The next year, he starred as a high school cross-country running coach in McFarland, USA. Diverging from type, Costner portrayed a psychopathic death row inmate who has a dead CIA agent's consciousness transferred to his brain in the thriller Criminal, 2016. That same year, he appeared in the acclaimed Hidden Figures, about 3 real-life African-American women who worked at the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, during the early years of the American space program. In the biopic Molly's Game, 2017, Costner played the estranged father of Molly Bloom, who became famous when she was arrested for her role in an illegal high-stakes poker ring favored by Hollywood celebrities. Yellowstone and Horizon. Costner then returned to television playing the patriarch of a Montana ranching family in Taylor Sheridan's Yellowstone, 2018-24. The show was hugely popular, and he won a Golden Globe Award, 2023. In 2024, Costner announced that he would not return to his role on the show. His last appearance was in Episode 8, 2023, of Yellowstone's 5th and final season. In the Netflix film The Highwayman, 2019, Costner played a former Texas Ranger searching for the outlaws Bonnie and Clyde. He then lent his voice to a contemplative golden retriever who narrates the story of his years as a companion to a race car driver in The Art of Racing in the Rain, 2019. His grandson from an abusive stepfather. Drama Let Him Go, 2020. He appeared as a former sheriff who seeks to save In 2024, Costner released Horizon, an American Saga, Chapter 1, the first installment of a planned four-movie series about the settling of the American West. In addition to starring in the film series, he has served as director, co-written scripts, and invested a substantial amount of his own money, some $38 million, toward its production. Western, a genre of novels and short stories, motion pictures, and television and radio shows that are set in the American West, usually in the period from the 1850s to the end of the 19th century. Though basically an American creation, the Western had its counterparts in the gaucho literature of Argentina and in tales of the settlement of the Australian outback. The genre reached its greatest popularity in the early and middle decades of the 20th century and declined somewhat thereafter. The Western has as its setting the immense plains, rugged tablelands, and mountain ranges of the portion of the United States lying west of the Mississippi River, in particular the Great Plains and the Southwest. This area was not truly open to white settlement until after the American Civil War, 1861–65, at which time the Plains Indians were gradually subdued and deprived of most of their lands by white settlers and by the U.S. cavalry. The conflict between white pioneers and Indians forms one of the basic themes of the Western. Another sprang out of the class of men known as cowboys, who were hired by ranchers to drive cattle across hundreds of miles of western pasturelands to railheads where the animals could be shipped eastward to market. The cattle and mining industries spurred the growth of towns, and the gradual imposition of law and order that such settled communities needed was accomplished by another class of men who became staple figures in the Western, the town sheriff and the U.S. Marshal. Actual historical persons in the American West have figured prominently in latter-day recreations of the era. Wild Bill Hickok, Wyatt Earp, and other lawmen have frequently been portrayed, as have such outlaws as Billy the Kid and Jesse James. The Western has always provided a rich mine for stories of adventure, and indeed a huge number of purely commercial works have capitalized on the basic appeal of gunslinging frontier adventurers, desperados, and lawmen. But the Western has also furnished the material for a higher form of artistic vehicle, particularly in motion pictures. This was perhaps because the historical Western setting lacked the subtly confining web of social conventions and mundane safeties that typify more settled societies. The West's tenuous hold on the rule of law and its fluid social fabric necessitated the settling of individual and group conflicts by the use of violence and the exercise of physical courage, and the moral dramas and dilemmas arising within this elemental, even primeval, framework lent themselves remarkably well to motion picture treatment. In literature, the Western story had its beginnings in the first adventure narratives that accompanied the opening of the West to white settlement shortly before the Civil War. Accounts of the Western plainsmen, scouts, buffalo hunters, and trappers were highly popular in the East. Perhaps the earliest and finest work in this genre was James Fenimore Cooper's The Prairie, 1827, though the high artistic level of this novel was perhaps atypical in regard to what followed. An early writer to capitalize on the popularity of Western adventure narratives was Easy C. Judson, whose pseudonym was Ned Buntlin. Known as the father of the dime novel, he wrote dozens of Western stories and was responsible for transforming Buffalo Bill into an archetype. Owen Wister, who first saw the West while recuperating from an illness, wrote the first Western that won critical praise, The Virginian, 1902. Classics of the genre have been written by men who actually worked as cowboys. One of the best loved of these was Bransford in Arcadia, 1914, reprinted 1917 as Bransford of Rainbow Range, by Eugene Manlove Rhodes, a former cowboy and government scout. Andy Adams incorporated many autobiographical incidents in his Log of a Cowboy, 1903. By far the best known and one of the most prolific writers of Westerns was Zane Grey, an Ohio dentist who became famous with the classic Riders of the Purple Sage, 1912. In all, Grey wrote more than 80 books, many of which retained wide popularity. Another popular and prolific writer of Westerns was Louis L'Amour. Western short stories have also been among America's favorites. H. Lewis, circa 1858 to 1914, a former cowboy, produced a series of popular stories told by the Old Cattleman. Stephen Crane created a comic classic of the genre with The Bride Comes to Yellow Sky, 1898, and Conrad Richter, 1890 to 1968, wrote a number of stories and novels of the Old Southwest. The Western Writers of America, formed in 1952, has cited many fine Western writers, including Ernest Haycox, 1899 to 1950, W.M. Rain, 1871 to 1954, a former Arizona Ranger who wrote more than 80 Western novels, and B.M. Bauer, 1871 to 1940, a woman whose talent for realistic detail convinced thousands of readers that she was a real cowboy writing from personal experience. Other Western classics are Walter Van Tilburg Clark's The Oxbow Incident, 1940, which uses a Nevada lynching as a metaphor for the struggle for justice. A.B. Guthrie, Jr.'s The Big Sky, 1947, about frontier life in the early 1840s and the way west, 1949, and Larry McMurtry's Pulitzer Prize-winning paean To the Bygone Cowboy, Lonesome Dove, 1985. Many Western novels and short stories first appeared in pulp magazines, such as Ace High Western Stories and Double Action Western, that were specifically devoted to publishing works in the genre. The Western film can be dated from Edwin S. Porter's The Great Train Robbery, 1903, which set the pattern for many films that followed. D.W. Griffith made a series of highly successful Westerns in the years before World War I. During the silent screen era, 3 actors achieved great popularity as stars of Westerns. G.M. Bronco Billy Anderson, the screen's first cowboy star, made hundreds of pictures that appeared almost weekly for 4 years. William S. Hart realistically portrayed a strong, silent man of the frontier, and Tom Mix dazzled audiences with his polished horsemanship and cleverness in outwitting outlaws. Other early cowboy stars such as Buck Jones, Hoot Gibson, Ken Maynard, William Boyd, Hopalong Cassidy, and Harry Carey contributed to a romanticized concept of the hero of Westerns. Most of the hundreds of Westerns made from the 1920s to the 1940s were low-budget films that had only slight variations on standard plots, but an increasing number were big or epic Westerns, a type introduced in James Cruise's The Covered Wagon, 1923, and John Ford's The Iron Horse, 1924. This type featured important stars and used larger budgets and modern production methods. The first epic Western to use talking in its soundtrack was Raoul Walsh's The Big Trail, 1930. Other early epic Westerns include Cimarron, 1931, Destry Rides Again, 1939, and Ford Stagecoach, 1939, which starred John Wayne, the mainstay of many Westerns. The Singing Cowboy, first made popular by Gene Autry and later by Tex Ritter and Roy Rogers, was an odd accoutrement of some of the Westerns of the late 1930s and the 40s and 50s. The epic Western entered its heyday in the 1940s and 50s with high-quality films by important directors such as Ford, My Darling Clementine, 1946, Howard Hawks, Red River, 1948, Michael Curtiz, Santa Fe Trail, and Virginia City, both, 1940, Fritz Lang, Western Union, 1941, William Wellman, The Oxbow Incident, 1943, King Vidor, Duel in the Sun, 1946, and others. Their films were marked by greater artistic self-expression and a somewhat more rigorous historical realism. A new and intently serious Western that could treat a wide variety of themes with sensitivity and dramatic realism appeared in the 1950s. Notable among these films were Henry King's The Gunfighter, 1950, Anthony Mann's Winchester 73, 1950, and The Man from Laramie, 1955, Fred Zinnemann's High Noon, 1952, Lang's Rancho Notorious, 1952, George Stevens's Shane, 1953, Nicholas Ray's Johnny Guitar, 1954, Samuel Fuller's Run of the Arrow, 1956, William Wyler's The Big Country, 1958, and Hawks's Rio Bravo, 1959. These later Westerns tended to dispense with the traditional models of the good lawman and the bad outlaw, and instead treated their main characters as complex and fallible human beings. Westerns explored various moral ambiguities and topical problems by means of dramatic allegories set in the Old West, thereby becoming a completely sophisticated genre in the process. The emphasis on human psychology and motivation continued into the 1960s with such films as Marlon Brando's One-Eyed Jacks, 1961, Ford's The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, 1962, and Sam Peckinpah's Ride the High Country, 1962, but there was also a new accent on graphically portrayed violence, as in Peckinpah's The Wild Bunch, 1969. There was also a shift in sympathy toward the Indians, the previous film depictions of whom were remarkably lacking in both understanding and appreciation. This new sympathy was exemplified in Ford's Cheyenne Autumn, 1964, and Arthur Penn's Little Big Man, 1970. By the time that Wayne made his last film, The Shouldest, 1976, the epic Western was clearly suffering from exhaustion, as cinematic attempts to debunk the mythologies of the Old West had merely resulted in the destruction of the genre's credibility and relevance altogether. These efforts did, however, produce some notably lighthearted westerns, including Cat, Baloo, 1965, and Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, 1969. During the late 1960s and the 70s, low-budget Italian and Spanish-made Western films achieved some commercial success. Sergio Leone was the chief director of such films, and Clint Eastwood, his principal actor in A Fistful of Dollars, 1964, and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, 1966, went on to direct and star in a few notable resuscitations of the Western, including The Outlaw Josie Wales, 1976, Pale Rider, 1985, and Unforgiven, 1992. But by the 1980s, Westerns had almost ceased to be produced in the United States. They were partially replaced by the space epic, a genre in which often all the aspects of a Western were utilized but the setting. Kevin Costner's Dances with Wolves, 1990, another film sympathetic to the Indians, was one of the most commercially successful Westerns made late in the 20th century. Westerns were also serialized on radio programs during that medium's heyday in the 1930s and 40s. The best known of these Western radio dramas were The Lone Ranger, featuring the mysterious lawman of that name, and Death Valley Days, which was set in the Far West. Television also took up Westerns in its earlier years. Such long-lived series as Gunsmoke, Bonanza, The Big Valley, and a half-dozen others captured large viewing audiences in the late 1950s and the 60s, after which their popularity faded.